The imposing mansion of the Thompson family, a symbol of power and tradition in New York's high society, was about to face an unexpected challenge. When Sarah Jones, a strong and determined woman, entered the Thompsons' lives as a daughter-in-law, she never imagined the depths of discrimination and prejudice she would have to endure. Over time, tensions increased and family conflicts intensified, until a devastating revelation changed everything. A dark secret, hidden in the family's shadows, was about to come to light. How could Sarah's struggle for respect and freedom become the catalyst for such a necessary transformation? Let's discover it together. But before we dive into this story of unexpected twists and moments of justice, comment below where you're watching from, and if you enjoy narratives of overcoming and transformation, don't forget to subscribe. The afternoon sun filtered through the windows of the luxurious Thompson mansion, bathing the preparations for Patricia Thompson's birthday party in its golden light. Sarah, a woman with dark skin and expressive eyes, moved gracefully through the kitchen, putting the finishing touches on the elaborate cake she had prepared for her mother-in-law. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the candles, aware of the importance Patricia placed on these celebrations. "Is that cake ready yet, Sarah?" The sharp voice of her husband, Andrew, startled her. "You know how my mother gets if something isn't perfect." Sarah nodded silently, swallowing the retort that burned in her throat. After 5 years of marriage, she had learned to keep quiet to avoid conflicts. However, it was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore the disdainful looks and hurtful comments from her in-laws. The party began with the arrival of the guests, all members of high society. Sarah felt out of place among the designer dresses and conversations about exclusive clubs. Patricia, a woman with silver hair and aristocratic bearing, observed her with a mixture of disgust and resignation. "Andrew, darling," Patricia said in a honeyed voice, "why don't you give Sarah her gift now? I'm sure she'll love it." Andrew smiled maliciously and pulled a package from behind his back. Sarah opened it cautiously, aware of the expectant looks around her. Inside, she found a cheap plastic strainer. "So you can fly back to your neighborhood whenever you want," Andrew joked, eliciting laughter from the guests. The racist comment fell like a dagger in Sarah's heart. The laughter around her amplified, becoming a deafening buzz. Years of humiliation and mistreatment bubbled up inside her, mixing with rage and helplessness. In an instant, Sarah lost control. With a sudden movement, she grabbed the cake she had prepared with such care and threw it to the floor. The crash of the plate breaking silenced the party abruptly. "Enough!" Sarah shouted, with tears of fury in her eyes. "I'm sick of your mockery and contempt." The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia looked at her with a mixture of shock and indignation, while Andrew seemed about to explode with rage. Without saying another word, Sarah turned and ran out of the mansion, leaving behind a trail of destroyed cake and recovered dignity. With her heart racing and tears blurring her vision, Sarah ran through the streets aimlessly. She didn't know where to go, but she was sure of one thing: she would never return to that house of horrors. Her steps instinctively led her to the only place where she had felt safe in recent years, the house of her friend Carla. As she ran, memories of years of mistreatment and humiliation passed through her mind like a fast-forward movie. Patricia's disdainful looks, Andrew's hurtful comments, the mocking laughter of family friends. Each memory was a dagger that pierced her heart, but also fueled her determination never to return. When she reached Carla's door, Sarah was panting, her makeup smeared and her dress stained with cake. She rang the doorbell desperately, praying that her friend was home. Carla opened the door and Hakan, seeing the state Sarah was in, hugged her without asking questions. Once inside, Sarah collapsed on the couch and, between sobs, told her everything that had happened at the party. "Oh, Sarah," Carla sighed, handing her a tissue. "I always knew that Andrew wasn't good for you, but I never imagined he would go this far." Sarah looked at her surprised. "You knew? Why didn't you ever tell me?" Carla lowered her gaze, ashamed. "I tried to hint at it several times, but you always seemed so in love. I was afraid that if I told you directly, you would distance yourself from me and be left with no one to turn to." This revelation hit Sarah like a slap. Had she been so blind? How many signs had she ignored over the years? "I can't go back, Carla," Sarah said with a trembling but determined voice. "Not after this." "And you don't have to," Carla replied firmly. "You can stay here as long as you need. Together we'll find a solution." That night, as Sarah tried to sleep in Carla's guest room, her phone kept buzzing with calls and messages from Andrew. He alternated between pleas for forgiveness and veiled threats. Sarah, with her heart in her throat, decided to turn off the phone. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and difficult decisions. Sarah, with Carla's help, began to plan her new life. She needed to find a job, a place to live, and above all, the strength to stand firm in her decision. One morning, as Sarah was looking through job ads in the newspaper, the doorbell rang. Carla went to answer and returned with a kind-looking man with calloused hands. "Sarah, this is Eric," Carla introduced. "He's the technician who's come to fix the bathroom plumbing." Eric greeted her with a warm smile that lit up his honey-colored eyes. "Nice to meet you, Sarah. I hope I'm not bothering you." As Eric worked, Sarah couldn't help but notice the gentleness in his movements and the passion with which he spoke about his trade. At one point, their eyes met, and Sarah felt a flutter in her stomach that she hadn't experienced in years. "You know," Eric said as he gathered his tools, "a few years ago, I had to start from scratch too. It's not easy, but you'd be surprised how strong you can be when you have no other choice." Those words resonated with Sarah for days. Maybe she could be strong too. Maybe this wasn't the end, but the beginning of something new. With renewed determination, Sarah began to search for work more diligently. She sent applications to stores, restaurants, offices, anywhere that might give her a chance. The rejections were frequent and painful, but she refused to give up. One afternoon, while waiting in line at an employment agency, her phone rang. It was Andrew. "Sarah, please, come back home," he pleaded in a honeyed voice. "You know you'll never find anyone better than me. Who else is going to want you?" Andrew's words, which would have made her doubt before, now only fueled her determination. With a firm voice, she replied, "You're wrong, Andrew. I have myself, and that's more than enough." And she hung up, feeling as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. That night, as she shared a simple dinner with Carla, Sarah realized that, for the first time in years, she felt at peace. The road ahead was uncertain and probably difficult, but it was hers. And that, more than any luxury or comfort, was what really mattered. The days turned into weeks, and Sarah slowly began to find her rhythm in this new life. Although she hadn't yet secured a stable job, she did small jobs here and there, cleaning, childcare, whatever she could to keep busy and earn some money. One afternoon, as she was returning from a less than promising job interview, she ran into Eric again. The technician was coming out of a nearby building, his toolbox over his shoulder, and a tired but satisfied expression on his face. "Sarah!" he exclaimed upon seeing her, his face lighting up with a smile. "What a surprise to see you here." Sarah couldn't help but return the smile. There was something about Eric that made her feel comfortable, as if she had known him all her life. "I just finished an interview," Sarah explained with a sigh. "Though I don't think they'll call me." Eric looked at her with understanding. "Don't get discouraged. Every no brings you closer to the yes you're looking for." They walked together for a while, sharing their experiences. Eric told her about his own struggles, about how he had to rebuild his life after a difficult divorce. "The hardest part was being separated from my son," Eric confessed, his voice tinged with sadness. "But I fight every day to be a good father, even if I can't be with him all the time." This revelation deeply moved Sarah. She saw in Eric an honest and hard-working man, so different from Andrew and his world of privilege and appearances. As they walked, Sarah noticed a sign in a window, "Kitchen assistant wanted." Without thinking twice, she entered the small restaurant, with Eric patiently waiting outside. Minutes later, Sarah came out with a radiant smile. "They gave me the job. I start tomorrow." Eric congratulated her with genuine joy, and on impulse, Sarah hugged him. For a moment, they stayed like that, feeling each other's warmth, before separating, somewhat embarrassed, but with a new spark in their eyes. The following days were a whirlwind of activity for Sarah. Between her new job at the restaurant and visits to the lawyer, Stephen, she barely had time to breathe. Stephen, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a calm voice, was helping her navigate the complicated divorce proceedings. "Sarah," Stephen said during one of their meetings, "I've been investigating and I've discovered something that might interest you." Sarah looked at him expectantly as the lawyer pulled some documents from his briefcase. "According to these records, both you and your mother worked for the Thompson family for years without a formal contract. That means you have labor rights that were ignored." This revelation hit Sarah like a bombshell. She remembered the long days of work in the Thompson mansion, the unpaid overtime, the vacations she never took. All of that had value, a value that had been denied to her. "What does this mean, Stephen?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "It means, Sarah, that you have a solid case not only for divorce, but to claim compensation for all those years of unrecognized work. The possibility of obtaining justice, not only for herself but also for her mother, ignited a flame of hope in Sarah's heart. It was no longer just about escaping a toxic relationship. Now she had the opportunity to correct years of injustice. That night, as she shared the news with Carla, Sarah realized how much she had changed in such a short time. The scared and submissive woman who had fled Patricia's party seemed like a stranger now. In her place, a stronger, more determined Sarah was emerging, ready to fight for what was rightfully hers. However, as Sarah grew stronger, the shadows of the past threatened to catch up with her. One day, as she was leaving the restaurant after her shift, she noticed a familiar car parked across the street. Inside, she could make out Andrew's silhouette, watching her. The initial fear gave way to indignation. Did he think he could intimidate her? With her head held high, Sarah walked in the opposite direction, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her scared. What Sarah didn't know was that this encounter was just the beginning. Andrew and Patricia were not willing to let her go so easily, and she would soon discover that the battle for her freedom was just beginning. The small apartment that Sarah had managed to rent thanks to her new job at the restaurant had become her refuge. Although modest, it represented her independence, a space where she could be herself without fear of judgment or reproach. One afternoon, while organizing some old papers she had managed to rescue from the Thompson house, Sarah found a crumpled letter at the bottom of a box. Patricia's elegant handwriting was unmistakable. With her heart racing, she began to read. "Dear Dean, I write to express my concern about Sarah Jones's scholarship application. Although I understand that her grades are exceptional, I'm afraid it would not be appropriate for a young woman of her social origin to represent our prestigious institution. I trust you will make the right decision. Sincerely, Patricia Thompson." Sarah's hands trembled as she held the letter. Suddenly, everything made sense. The inexplicable rejection from the university, Patricia's comments about how a woman should stay at home, Andrew's insistence that she didn't need to study. They had conspired to keep her dependent, to deny her opportunities outside the Thompson mansion. Anger and sadness mixed in Sarah's chest, forming a knot that was hard to untie. Years of dreams and aspirations had been taken away from her with a simple stroke of a pen. But instead of sinking her, this discovery ignited a new determination within her. With shaking hands, Sarah dialed Stephen's number. "I need to see you urgently," she said, as soon as the lawyer answered. "I found something that could change everything." That same afternoon in Stephen's office, Sarah spread the letter on the desk. The lawyer read it carefully, his expression becoming more serious with each line. "This is serious, Sarah," he finally said. "It's not only evidence of discrimination, but it could also be considered obstruction of opportunities. It definitely strengthens our case." As they discussed the legal implications of the discovery, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about all the doors that had been closed to her, all the paths she couldn't explore. But now, with this evidence in hand, she felt that she could finally begin to reclaim the life that had been denied to her. As she left Stephen's office, Sarah noticed a folded paper under her car's windshield wiper. Cautiously, she unfolded it and read the message written with letters cut out from a magazine. "Be careful what you do. Andrew won't stop until he has you back." A chill ran down her spine. Who had left that message? Was it a threat or a warning? The uncertainty accompanied her all the way home, making her constantly look in the rearview mirror, fearing to see Andrew's car following her. That night, unable to sleep, Sarah made a decision. She couldn't continue living in fear. She needed to arm herself with knowledge, with tools to defend herself, with determination. She searched online for literacy and adult education courses. To her surprise, she found a free program at the local community center. Without thinking twice, she enrolled. The idea of going back to studying, of making up for lost time, filled her with an excitement she hadn't felt in years. On the first day of classes, Sarah entered the classroom with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. She sat in the front row, new notebook in hand, ready to absorb every word. The teacher, a middle-aged woman with a kind smile, began the class with a phrase that would be etched in Sarah's mind. "It's never too late to learn, to grow, to change our story." As the weeks passed, Sarah immersed herself more and more in her studies. She discovered the pleasure of reading, devouring books that would have seemed intimidating before. Each page read, each exercise completed, was an act of rebellion against those who had tried to keep her in ignorance. One afternoon, as Sarah was studying in the local library, she felt a presence behind her. As she turned, she found herself face to face with Eric. "Sarah!" he exclaimed, genuinely surprised. "I didn't expect to find you here." "I'm taking classes," she replied with a mixture of pride and shyness. "I'm learning everything I couldn't before." The admiration in Eric's eyes was evident. "That's amazing, Sarah. You're an extraordinary woman." Those words, spoken with such sincerity, made Sarah blush. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a different future, one where love and respect went hand in hand. But reality soon reminded her that her struggle was far from over. That same night, upon arriving home, she found her door ajar. With her heart in her throat, she entered cautiously. The apartment was intact, but on the kitchen table was a photo of her and Eric in the library, clearly taken without their knowledge. On the back, a note written in Andrew's unmistakable handwriting: "Do you think you can replace me so easily? Remember who you belong to." The initial fear gave way to anger. How dare Andrew invade her space, threaten her like this? With trembling but determined hands, Sarah dialed Stephen's number. It was time to take more drastic measures. As she waited for the lawyer to answer, Sarah looked out the window at the city stretching before her. She was no longer the same woman who had fled the Thompson mansion months ago. She had grown, she had strengthened, and she was ready to face whatever came. What Sarah didn't know was that fate had more surprises in store, some painful, others hopeful. The path to her true freedom was just beginning, and each step would bring her not only closer to the justice she sought, but also to discoveries about herself that would change the course of her life forever. The day of the trial dawned grey and rainy, as if the sky reflected the tension in the air. Sarah, dressed in a sober suit that Carla had lent her, entered the courthouse with her head held high, flanked by Stephen and Harley. To her surprise, Eric, who had insisted on accompanying her to provide moral support. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw Andrew and Patricia sitting on the other side of the room, their faces a mask of disdain and superiority. However, Sarah refused to be intimidated. She had come too far to cower now. The trial began with the opening statements. Stephen eloquently presented Sarah's case, detailing years of unpaid work, discrimination, and emotional abuse. The letter Sarah had discovered became a key piece of evidence, provoking murmurs of indignation among those present. When it was the defense's turn, the Thompsons' lawyer tried to discredit Sarah, painting her as an opportunist seeking to take advantage of a respectable family. Sarah clenched her fists under the table, fighting against the urge to shout the truth. But then something unexpected happened. In the middle of his plea, Patricia, who had been listening with an expression of disdain, suddenly brought a hand to her chest and began to gasp. In a matter of seconds, she collapsed to the floor. The room erupted into chaos. Andrew shouted for help, while the paramedics, who were always on duty at the courthouse, rushed towards Patricia. Sarah watched the scene with a mixture of shock and concern. Despite everything Patricia had done to her, she couldn't help but feel empathy seeing her so vulnerable. The judge ordered an immediate recess. As Patricia was being taken to the hospital, Sarah found herself in the hallway trying to process what had just happened. Eric approached and put a hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked with genuine concern. Sarah nodded, although she wasn't sure she was. "It's just that I didn't expect this. I don't know how to feel." "It's normal to be confused," Eric said softly. "What matters is that you don't let this divert you from your path." His words resonated with Sarah. He was right. She couldn't allow this unexpected turn to make her doubt her pursuit of justice. The trial was postponed indefinitely due to Patricia's condition. In the days that followed, Sarah struggled between anxiety over the interruption of the legal process and a strange concern for her ex-mother-in-law's health. One afternoon, as Sarah was leaving her class at the community center, she came face to face with Andrew. For a moment, fear paralyzed her, but she forced herself to stay calm. "What do you want, Andrew?" she asked, her voice firmer than she felt. Andrew looked at her with a mixture of anger and desperation. "My mother is dying, Sarah. Is this what you wanted? To destroy our family?" Sarah felt as if she had been slapped. "I didn't want this, Andrew. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I just wanted to be free, to be myself." For a moment, she saw a flash of something resembling remorse in Andrew's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by his usual arrogance. "You're still so naive," he spat. "Do you think that mechanic can give you the life I gave you? You'll come crawling back, you'll see." Before Sarah could respond, Andrew walked away, leaving her with a whirlwind of emotions. But instead of feeling defeated, Sarah felt stronger than ever. Andrew's words, which before would have made her doubt, now only reaffirmed her decision. That night, as she reflected on the encounter with Andrew, Sarah made a bold decision. She dialed the number of the hospital where Patricia was. "Hello," she said when the nurse answered. "This is Sarah Jones. I was wondering if I can visit Patricia Thompson tomorrow." The nurse's affirmative response surprised her. With her heart racing, Sarah prepared for an encounter that could change everything. What Sarah didn't know was that this visit would trigger a series of events that would test her strength, her compassion, and her determination like never before. The path to true freedom was full of unexpected turns, and the most surprising one was yet to come. The hospital loomed imposingly before Sarah, its white walls reflecting the morning sunlight. With each step she took towards the entrance, she felt her heart beating faster. Was she doing the right thing by visiting Patricia, or was she walking straight into a trap? When she reached Patricia's room, she paused for a moment before entering. She took a deep breath, gathering all her inner strength, and opened the door. Patricia lay in the bed, connected to several machines that emitted constant beeps. Seeing her like this, so fragile and vulnerable, made Sarah feel a mixture of compassion and confusion. This woman, who had caused her so much harm, now seemed so defenseless. "What are you doing here?" Patricia's weak but still sharp voice broke the silence. Sarah approached the bed, maintaining her calm. "I came to see how you were, Mrs. Thompson." Patricia let out a bitter laugh that turned into a cough. "Have you come to gloat to see how the great Patricia Thompson has fallen?" "No," Sarah responded softly. "I came because, despite everything, I don't wish you any harm, and because I think it's time we speak the truth." Something in Sarah's tone made Patricia look at her attentively. For a moment, silence filled the room, interrupted only by the beeping of the machines. "The truth," Patricia finally spoke, her voice laden with contained emotions. "The truth is that you were never good enough for my son, for our family." Sarah felt as if she had been punched in the stomach, but she stood firm. "And is that why you decided to sabotage my education? Is that why you treated me as less than human for years?" Patricia's eyes widened in surprise. "How? I found the letter," Sarah explained. "The one you wrote to the university to reject my scholarship." For the first time since she had known her, Sarah saw something resembling shame in Patricia's eyes. I just wanted to protect my son," Patricia murmured. "I thought I was doing the right thing." The right thing. Sarah felt anger growing inside her. How can it be right to destroy someone's dreams, to treat her as if she were worth nothing? Patricia closed her eyes, as if the weight of her actions finally caught up with her. "I was afraid," she confessed in a whisper, "afraid that if you got educated, if you became independent, you would take Andrew away from me, that our family would lose everything we had built. Sarah was left speechless at this confession. She had never imagined that Patricia's contempt was born out of fear. "Mrs. Thompson," Sarah said after a moment, "I never wanted to destroy your family. I just wanted to be part of it, to be respected, to be loved for who I am." Tears began to roll down Patricia's cheeks. "I know," she said in a broken voice, "and now it's too late to fix it." Sarah felt a wave of conflicting emotions. On one hand, anger and resentment for years of mistreatment. On the other, a strange compassion for this woman who, in her fear and prejudice, had caused so much damage. "It's never too late to change," Sarah said softly, "to make things right." At that moment, the door burst open. Andrew entered, his face a mask of fury upon seeing Sarah. "What the hell are you doing here?" Andrew roared, advancing menacingly towards Sarah. Sarah stood firm, refusing to back down. "I came to talk to your mother, Andrew, to seek answers." "You have no right to be here," Andrew shouted, his face reddened with anger. "After everything you've done, you have the nerve to come and torment my mother on her sickbed." Before Sarah could respond, Patricia's weak but firm voice rose from the bed. "Andrew." "Stop!" Everyone turned to Patricia, surprised by the authority in her tone. "Sarah has the right to be here," Patricia continued. "In fact, I owe her an apology. To her and to you." Andrew looked at his mother in disbelief. "What are you talking about, Mum?" Patricia took a deep breath before continuing. "For years I've manipulated your life, Andrew. I pushed you to marry someone from our social class. I convinced you that Sarah wasn't good enough for you. But I was wrong." Sarah watched the scene with a mixture of amazement and compassion. Seeing Patricia, the woman who had despised her so much, admitting her mistakes was something she never thought possible. "But Mom," Andrew protested, "everything you did was for our good, to maintain our status." "No," Patricia interrupted. "I did it out of fear and prejudice, and in the process, I almost destroyed an innocent young woman's life and my own son's happiness." Andrew collapsed into a chair, visibly shaken by his mother's words. Sarah, for her part, felt as if an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Finally, after so many years, the truth was coming to light. "Sarah," Patricia said, extending a trembling hand towards her, "I know it's probably too late, but I ask for your forgiveness, for all the harm I've caused you, for all the opportunities I denied you." Sarah took Patricia's hand, feeling the fragility of her fingers. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson," she responded in a soft voice. "Your apology means a lot to me." Andrew watched the exchange with a mixture of confusion and shame. "Sarah, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything now, Andrew," Sarah replied, "but I hope this makes you reflect on your own actions and decisions." At that moment, a nurse entered the room, announcing that visiting time was over. Sarah said goodbye to Patricia with a kind gesture and left the room, leaving mother and son to process what had happened. As she walked down the hospital hallway, Sarah felt as if she had left behind an enormous weight. The confrontation she had feared so much had turned into a moment of truth and, possibly, healing. As she left the hospital, she found Eric waiting for her in the parking lot. He had insisted on driving her, worried about how the encounter might affect her. "How did it go?" he asked with genuine concern. Sarah looked at him, a small smile forming on her lips. "It was liberating," she replied. "I think I can finally start closing this chapter of my life." Eric hugged her gently, and Sarah allowed herself to enjoy the comfort of his embrace. For the first time in a long time, she felt that the future was opening up before her, full of possibilities. What Sarah didn't know was that this moment of apparent resolution was just the beginning of a new stage in her life. The events that would follow would test her newly discovered strength and take her down paths she never imagined. As they drove away from the hospital, Sarah looked out the car window, observing the city passing by quickly. She realized that, although she had won an important battle, the war for her independence and happiness was not over yet. But now, with the truth on her side and a new confidence in herself, she was ready to face whatever came. The path to Sarah's true freedom and personal fulfillment was just beginning, and the biggest challenges were yet to come. But with each obstacle overcome, with each truth revealed, Sarah was getting closer to the woman she was always meant to be. The months following the confrontation at the hospital were a whirlwind of changes for Sarah. The trial, which had resumed after Patricia's recovery, took an unexpected turn. With Patricia's confession about her past actions, Sarah's case was considerably strengthened. On a sunny morning, Sarah found herself back in the courtroom, this time to hear the final verdict. The judge, an elderly man with wise eyes, cleared his throat before speaking. After considering all the evidence presented, this court rules in favor of Mrs. Sarah Jones and, he announced, she will be granted compensation for the years of unpaid work and will be awarded alimony. Relief and emotion flooded Sarah. Years of struggle, of feeling undervalued and exploited, were finally coming to an end. She looked towards where Andrew and Patricia were sitting. Andrew seemed dejected, but Patricia, surprisingly, nodded slightly towards Sarah, as if accepting the verdict. As she left the courthouse, Sarah was greeted by hugs from Carla and Eric. "You did it, Sarah," exclaimed Carla, with tears of joy in her eyes. "No," Sarah corrected with a smile. "We did it. I wouldn't have made it this far without you." Eric looked at her with pride and something more, something that made Sarah's heart skip. "I always knew you were a fighter," he said softly. That night, Sarah celebrated her victory with a small dinner in her apartment. As she shared laughs and anecdotes with Carla and Eric, she realized how much her life had changed in such a short time. She was no longer the fearful and submissive woman who had fled the Thompson mansion. Now she was a strong, independent woman full of hope for the future. However, fate had more surprises in store for Sarah. A few days after the sentence, she received an unexpected call. It was from a university in New York City. "Mrs. Jones," said the voice on the other end of the line, "we have reviewed your case and we would like to offer you a full scholarship to study law at our institution. We believe your experience and determination would be a valuable addition to our program." Sarah was speechless for a moment. The dream that had been taken away from her years ago now presented itself again before her, bigger and brighter than ever. I don't know what to say," she finally stammered. "It's an incredible opportunity, but my life is here now." "We understand it's an important decision," the voice responded. "Take the time you need to think about it." After hanging up, Sarah sat on her couch, overwhelmed by emotions. On one hand, the excitement of finally being able to pursue her dream of studying. On the other, the fear of leaving behind everything she had built in recent months. That night, while having dinner with Eric at a small restaurant, Sarah told him about the university offer. "It's wonderful, Sarah," Eric said with a smile, although Sarah noticed a hint of sadness in his eyes. "You should accept. It's the opportunity you've always deserved." "But what about us?" Sarah asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Eric took her hand across the table. "Sarah, what I feel for you is real and deep. But I can't be the reason you give up your dreams. If it's meant to be, we'll find a way." Eric's words, full of love and understanding, deeply moved Sarah. At that moment, she knew she had found not just a partner, but a true support in her life. The following days were a whirlwind of preparations and goodbyes. Sarah decided to accept the scholarship, knowing it was an opportunity she couldn't pass up. Carla helped her pack, filling boxes not only with clothes and books, but with memories of her new life. The day of her departure came too soon. At the bus station, Sarah said goodbye to Carla with a hug full of tears and promises to keep in touch. When it was Eric's turn, words seemed insufficient. "This isn't goodbye," Eric said, his voice laden with emotion. "It's see you later. Go and conquer the world, Sarah. I'll be here, waiting to hear about all your adventures." With a last kiss and a silent promise of a future together, Sarah boarded the bus that would take her towards her new life. As she watched the city recede through the window, she felt a mixture of excitement and nostalgia. She was closing a chapter of her life, but she was ready to write a new one, full of promises and possibilities. What Sarah didn't know was that this new chapter would bring challenges she never imagined, opportunities that would change the course of her life, and revelations that would shake the foundations of everything she thought she knew about herself and her past. As the bus moved towards New York City, Sarah looked towards the horizon, ready to face whatever fate had in store for her. Her journey of self-discovery and empowerment was just beginning, and the most exciting chapters of her story were yet to be written. New York City welcomed Sarah with a whirlwind of noise, color, and energy that momentarily overwhelmed her. The contrast with the life she had left behind was palpable, and for a moment, she wondered if she had made the right decision. Her small apartment in Brooklyn quickly became her refuge. Although modest, it represented her independence and the beginning of a new life. The bare walls were soon filled with photos of Carla and Eric, reminding her of the support she had, even at a distance. The first day of classes at the university was a mix of excitement and nervousness. Sarah, sitting in the lecture hall, felt out of place among students much younger than her. However, when the professor began to talk about social justice and human rights, she felt she was exactly where she needed to be. The months flew by between readings, essays, and passionate debates. Sarah discovered that her personal experience gave her a unique perspective in many discussions, and she soon earned the respect of both peers and professors alike. One afternoon, while studying in the library, Sarah received a text message that made her heart skip a beat. It was from Eric. "Hi, Sarah. Hope everything's going well. I have important news to share. Can we video call tonight?" With trembling hands, Sarah responded affirmatively. For the rest of the day, her mind didn't stop imagining scenarios, some hopeful, others frightening. That night, when Eric's face appeared on her laptop screen, Sarah held her breath. "Sarah," Eric began, his voice charged with emotion, "I've been offered a job in New York City, a big construction project that will last at least a year." Sarah's heart leapt. "Does that mean—" "Yes," Eric smiled. "If you want, we could be together." The joy that flooded Sarah was indescribable. The distance had been difficult, and although they had maintained their relationship through calls and messages, nothing compared to the idea of having him close. However, life had new challenges in store. Shortly after Eric's arrival in the city, Sarah found herself facing one of the most difficult cases in her legal practice class. It involved an immigrant woman fighting for custody of her children, who had been taken away by a system that didn't understand her situation. The case touched a sensitive nerve in Sarah. She saw in this woman the reflection of her own struggle, of her mother, of so many other women who'd been silenced and undervalued. She immersed herself in the case with a passion that surprised even her professors, sleepless nights researching, entire days in court observing similar proceedings, endless meetings with her client. Sarah was determined to win this case, not just for the grade, but for what it represented. Eric, although proud of Sarah's dedication, began to feel left out. Cancelled dinners and postponed conversations began to take their toll on their relationship. One night, after Sarah arrived late to yet another date, Eric finally spoke up. "Sarah, I understand how important this case is to you, but I feel like we're losing ourselves in the process. I came here to be with you, but I hardly see you." Eric's words were like a bucket of cold water for Sarah. She realized that in her eagerness to prove herself and fight for others, she had neglected something fundamental, her own relationship. "Eric, Sarah began, tears threatening to spill. "I'm so sorry. I didn't realize how all of this was affecting you." Eric took her hands, his gaze soft but concerned. "I love you, Sarah, and I'm incredibly proud of you, but we need to find a balance." That night marked a turning point for Sarah. She realized that the fight for justice didn't have to mean sacrificing her personal life. With renewed determination, she set out to find a balance between her passion for law and her love for Eric. The following days were a challenge, but Sarah strived to keep her promises. She organized her study schedules more efficiently, reserved time for dinners and walks with Eric, and even started practicing yoga to manage stress. Meanwhile, the immigrant woman's case progressed. Sarah and her study team had discovered irregularities in the process of separating the mother from her children. With this new information, they filed a motion with the court that could change the course of the case. The day of the hearing arrived, and Sarah found herself standing before the judge, presenting her arguments with an eloquence that surprised even her supervising professor. When she finished her plea, there was a moment of silence in the room before the judge spoke. "Ms. Jones," said the judge, "I must congratulate you on your presentation. You have shed light on aspects of this case that deserve a deeper review. I order a full investigation and the temporary suspension of any deportation proceedings until this matter is resolved." The victory, although partial, was sweet. Sarah's client hugged her in tears, thanking her over and over again for giving her hope. But for Sarah, the most emotional part was seeing Eric at the back of the room smiling with pride. That night, as they celebrated in a small restaurant, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed in such a short time. From being a submissive and voiceless woman, she had become someone capable of fighting not only for herself, but for others. "I'm so proud of you," Eric said, raising his glass. "You've found your calling, Sarah. It's beautiful to see you shine like this." Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. "I wouldn't have made it this far without you, Eric. Your support means everything to me." As they toasted to the future, Sarah couldn't imagine that fate had one more surprise in store, one that would test everything she thought she knew about herself and her past. A few days later, while checking her email, Sarah found a message that left her breathless. It was from a woman named Isabel Foster, who claimed to be her maternal aunt. "Dear Sarah," the message began, "I've spent years looking for you. There are things about your past, about your mother, that you need to know. Please contact me. It's urgent." Sarah stared at the screen, feeling as if the ground was moving beneath her feet. An aunt? What secrets could there be about her mother, who had passed away when Sarah was just a child? With trembling hands, Sarah dialed the number Isabel had provided in the email. As she waited for someone to answer, her mind was a whirlwind of questions and emotions. "Hello?" a voice answered on the other end of the line. "Isabel?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "This is Sarah, Sarah Jones." There was a moment of silence, followed by a choked sob. "Oh, Sarah, at last. There's so much I need to tell you." As Isabel began to speak, Sarah felt she was about to embark on a journey that would change everything she thought she knew about her identity and her origins. What she was about to discover would not only affect her past, but would also profoundly shape her future. The coffee steamed in front of Sarah as she nervously waited in the small cafe where she had agreed to meet Isabel. Every time the door opened, her heart skipped a beat. Finally, a middle-aged woman with familiar features that Sarah couldn't quite place entered and looked around anxiously. Their eyes met, and, in that instant, Sarah knew she was facing her aunt. Isabel approached with trembling steps and, without a word, hugged Sarah tightly. "You look so much like your mother," Isabel whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. When they finally sat down, Isabel pulled an envelope from her purse. "Sarah, what I'm about to tell you will change everything you believe about your family and your past." With shaking hands, Isabel extracted several documents and photographs from the envelope. "Your mother, my sister Eleanor, didn't die when you were a child, as you were led to believe. She was separated from you by the Thompson family." Sarah felt as if the air had been knocked out of her lungs. "What? But how? Why?" Isabel took a deep breath before continuing. "Eleanor worked as a domestic employee in the Thompson house. She fell in love with Frederick, Andrew's younger brother. When she became pregnant with you, the Thompson family panicked. They couldn't allow their name to be mixed with someone from the lower class." Sarah listened in shock, trying to process every word. Her entire world was being shaken to its foundations. "They threatened Elena," Isabel continued. "Says they told her that if she didn't leave and leave you with them, they would make sure she could never see you, that they would use their influence to take you away from her arms forever. Eleanor, desperate and without resources to fight, agreed to leave on the condition that they would raise you as part of the family." Tears were flowing freely down Sarah's cheeks. Everything she thought she knew about her life, about who she was crumbling before her eyes. "Where is she now?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Isabel lowered her gaze. "Elena never recovered from losing you. She fell into a deep depression. A few months ago, when her health worsened, she made me promise I would find you and tell you the truth." She passed away 3 weeks ago, Sarah. I'm so sorry." Sarah's world stopped. The mother she thought she had lost so long ago had actually been alive all this time, suffering in silence, rage, pain, and confusion mixed inside her like an uncontrollable storm. "Why now?" Sarah asked, her voice laden with emotion. "Why didn't you look for me before?" "We tried, Sarah," Isabel replied with regret, "but the Thompsons were very powerful. Every time we got close, they threatened us. It was only after your trial, when their influence diminished, that we were finally able to locate you." Sarah remained silent, trying to assimilate all this information. Her entire life had been an elaborate lie, a web of deceptions woven by those who claimed to be her family. "There's something else," said Isabel, pulling out a sealed envelope from her purse. "Elena left this for you. They're letters she wrote over the years, letters she could never send you." With trembling hands, Sarah took the envelope. Inside, she found dozens of letters, each filled with love, regret, and hope. Her mother's handwriting, unfamiliar yet strangely familiar, filled page after page with stories, advice, and dreams for her daughter's future. As she read, Sarah felt as if she was finally getting to know the woman who had given her life, the woman who had been forced to make the ultimate sacrifice out of love for her daughter. That night, back in her apartment, Sarah sat with Eric and told him everything. He listened in silence, offering his unconditional support with every caress, every understanding look. "What are you going to do now?" Eric asked softly when Sarah finished her story. Sarah looked out the window, towards the lights of the city that never sleeps. "I need answers, Eric. I need to confront the Thompsons one last time. And then I need to honor my mother's memory, continue the fight she couldn't." Eric hugged her tightly. "I'll be with you every step of the way, Sarah. Whatever you decide to do, we'll face it together." As the sun began to peek over the horizon, Sarah made a decision. She was no longer the scared woman who had fled the Thompson mansion. Now she was a fighter, a defender of justice, and she was ready to face her past once and for all. What Sarah didn't know was that this final confrontation would not only bring closure to her painful past, but would also open doors to a future she never dared to imagine. A future where her voice, and her mother's voice bands, would finally be heard. The afternoon sun bathed the imposing Thompson mansion with a golden glow as Sarah stopped in front of the main door. Eric, by her side, gave her a reassuring squeeze of the hand. With a deep breath, Sarah rang the doorbell. Moments later, the door opened, revealing a visibly aged and emaciated Andrew. His eyes widened at the sight of Sarah. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice a mixture of surprise and nervousness. "We need to talk, Andrew," Sarah responded firmly, "about the truth, the whole truth." Andrew paled, but nodded slowly, stepping aside to let them in. In the living room, Patricia was sitting in her favorite armchair, her face a mask of shock at seeing Sarah. "I know everything about my mother, Eleanor," Sarah began without preamble. "I know how you separated her from me, how you threatened her, how you raised me with lies." The silence that followed was deafening. Andrew collapsed into an armchair while Patricia closed her eyes, as if the weight of decades of secrets finally crushed her. "It was your grandfather's idea," Patricia finally whispered. He said it was best for everyone, that we would give you a better life than Elena could offer you." "A better life?" Sarah's voice trembled with emotion. "You took my mother away from me. You denied me my true identity. You treated me like an intruder in my own family." Andrew looked up, his eyes filled with tears. I didn't know until after we were married. By then, I felt it was too late to tell the truth." Sarah shook her head in disbelief. "There's always time for the truth, Andrew, but you chose silence, the comfort of the lie." "I'm so sorry, Sarah," Patricia sobbed. "If I could go back." "But you can't," Sarah interrupted. "You can't change the past, but you can do something now. You can publicly acknowledge the truth. You can use your influence to help other women in similar situations." Andrew and Patricia exchanged looks, guilt and regret evident on their faces. "We will," Andrew finally said. "We'll tell the truth, regardless of the consequences." Sarah nodded, feeling as if an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. Before leaving, Sarah paused at the door and looked at the Thompsons one last time. My mother spent her life longing for me, writing me letters she could never send. I'm going to honor her memory by fighting for those who have no voice. It's the least I can do for her. With those words, Sarah left the Thompson mansion for the last time, leaving behind a painful chapter of her life and embracing a future full of purpose. The following months were a whirlwind of activity. The Thompsons. Public revelation shook high society and opened a national debate on the rights of domestic workers. Sarah, driven by her personal story, became a leading voice in the fight for social justice. Graduating with honors, Sarah established a foundation in memory of her mother, dedicated to providing legal assistance to women in vulnerable situations. Eric, always by her side, expanded his construction business to offer employment opportunities to women seeking to become independent from abusive situations. One afternoon, years later, Sarah found herself standing before an audience in the Supreme Court, defending a landmark case on the rights of domestic workers. As she presented her arguments, she felt an inner strength that went beyond her own experience. It was her mother's voice, the voice of all the women who had been silenced throughout history. As she finished her plea, there was a moment of silence in the room before applause erupted. Sarah, with tears in her eyes, looked towards the back of the room where Eric was watching her with pride, holding their young daughter Elena in his arms, named in honor of the mother Sarah never really got to know. Weeks later, when the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the cause Sarah was defending, the news spread like wildfire across the country. It was a milestone in the fight for domestic workers' rights, a giant step towards the social justice Sarah had dreamed of achieving. That night, as they celebrated in their home with friends and colleagues, Sarah found herself in a moment of quiet reflection on the balcony. Looking at the city lights, she thought about the long road she had traveled since that night she fled the Thompson mansion. Eric joined her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about, my love?" he asked softly. Sarah smiled, leaning into him. "About everything that's happened, about how each challenge, each pain, has led me to this moment. I'm thinking about my mother, how proud she would be if she could see me now." "She sees you, Sarah," Eric said with conviction, "and not just her. You're a beacon of hope for thousands of women across the country. You've turned your pain into purpose, your struggle into a movement." Eric's words warmed Sarah's heart. There were moments when she still couldn't believe how much her life had changed, how much she had grown and learned. "You know," Sarah continued, turning to look Eric in the eyes, "there's something I've been thinking about lately. I want to expand the foundation, take it beyond legal assistance. I want to create an education and empowerment program for young women." Eric's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "It's a wonderful idea, Sarah. What do you have in mind?" "Imagine a program that not only teaches labor and legal rights, but also practical skills, personal finance, technology, leadership. I want to give these young women the tools I didn't have, the opportunities that were denied to my mother." Eric kissed her softly. "It's perfect. And I know you'll make it happen, you always do." At that moment, little Elena's cry interrupted them. Sarah smiled, heading to her daughter's room. As she cradled her in her arms, she looked at her innocent face and felt a wave of determination. "I promise you, my little one," Sarah whispered, "that you will grow up in a better world, a world where your voice will be heard, where your dreams will have no limits. And if you ever face obstacles, remember the strength that runs through your veins, the strength of your grandmother Elena, the strength of all the women who have fought before us." The following years saw Sarah's dream become reality. The Elena Foundation's empowerment program, as she decided to name it in honor of her mother, expanded across the United States, touching the lives of thousands of young women. Sarah traveled the country, sharing her story, inspiring others to raise their voices and fight for their rights. On one of these trips, Sarah found herself back in her hometown. Walking through the streets that once saw her flee in fear, she now advanced with her head held high, respected and admired. As she passed in front of the former Thompson mansion, now converted into a community center thanks to Andrew and Patricia's donation in a final act of redemption. Sarah paused for a moment. She remembered the scared young woman she once was, the humiliations she endured, the pain of separation and deception. But she also remembered the strength she discovered in herself, the love she found in Eric, the truth about her mother that, although painful, had set her free. With a serene smile, Sarah continued on her way. She was no longer the victim of her story, but the author of her own destiny. She had transformed her pain into purpose, her struggle into a movement that was changing lives. That night, back in her hotel, Sarah received a call from Eric. "How was your day, my love?" he asked. "Transformative," Sarah replied. "As always. You know, I was thinking, maybe it's time to take the foundation beyond the United States. There are so many women around the world who need support, who need to know that their voices matter." Eric laughed softly. "There's my Sarah. Always dreaming big. And I know you'll achieve it. You always do." As she said goodbye to Eric, Sarah looked out the window towards the city that once saw her leave in fear and now welcomed her as a heroine. She thought of her mother, of Carla, of all the women who had supported her on her journey. She thought of her daughter Eleanor and the future she was helping to build for her. Sarah Jones, once a silenced and oppressed woman, was now a powerful voice for change. Her story, which began with pain and fear, had become a testimony to resilience, love, and the transformative power of truth. As the sun set over the city, Sarah closed her eyes and smiled. The circle had closed, but her journey, the journey of uplifting and empowering other women, was just beginning, and she was ready for every new challenge, every new opportunity to make the world a more just and equitable place. With a heart full of gratitude and determination, Sarah prepared for the next day, ready to continue writing not only her story, but the story of all women who, like her, deserved to be heard, valued, and empowered.